The journey began on a humid August afternoon when the last thing either Linda Holt or Marcus Castile wanted was a mandatory retreat. Both were far too busy for such an excursion. Linda, a marketing executive known for her swift negotiations and razor sharp focus, had left behind a flurry of emails, her assistant's frantic texts, and a brand new voice messaging system set to keep her clients at bay. Marcus, a sharp suited corporate lawyer with a reputation for working late into the night and inhaling coffee by the gallon, had grudgingly closed his laptop moments before stepping into the car that would drop them off at the foot of the woods. Neither relished the idea of leaving behind their Blackberries, laptops, and the ever glow of neon that accompanied their metropolitan habitat. At first glance, Linda and Marcus appeared to have nothing in common aside from their sophisticated wardrobes. Linda, in her pristine white blouse and tailored black pants, had no intention of letting the wrinkles of wilderness sabotage her image. Marcus, sporting a designer suit that shimmered faintly in the afternoon light, took pride in his carefully gelled hair and polished shoes. They were the definition of city high flyers: ambitious, focused, and always connected. Their suits were the armor they wore against a world that demanded performance every second of the day. Now, though, they were expected to spend an entire week completely off the grid, locked away in a lakeside cabin with no Wi-Fi, no cell service, and limited electricity from a rickety generator. It was like a joke gone wrong. Both felt singled out for punishment. The cabin was a rough-hewn structure at the edge of a remote forest, surrounded by towering pines, rolling hills, and the gentle sprawl of a crystal-clear lake. It looked like a relic of simpler times, its weathered logs rubbed up against an old porch that threatened to collapse if one stepped too heavily. The inside was just as sparse: a single bedroom with two narrow beds, each sporting a faded patchwork quilt, a small but serviceable kitchen with a wooden table and two chairs, a living area with a stone fireplace that had seen better days, and a solitary bathroom with a window that looked out on a grove of birches. If they had tried to find the place on a map, they would have struggled. It was hidden away at the end of a dirt road that had more potholes than actual gravel. On arrival, they stood awkwardly on the porch, key in Marcus's hand, a moment of silence stretching between them like an invisible wall. Linda felt a pang of anxiety, realizing that her phone was now a brick of useless metal at the bottom of her designer purse. Marcus, who had mentally cataloged the countless memos awaiting him, almost reached for the device in his pocket, only to clench his jaw at the recollection that his phone, too, would be nothing more than a camera for the foreseeable future. Their boss, a corporate visionary bent on team synergy, had decided that the best way for them to decompress and learn to collaborate was to strand them in nature. Linda and Marcus each suspected the real goal might have been to force them to relinquish control and find new ways of thinking. The place smelled of pine needles, and the only audible sounds were birds, cicadas, and their own measured breathing. Despite sharing a ride, Linda and Marcus hadn't bothered to converse much, only the barest courtesy. They were too busy composing mental to-do lists for when they returned to civilization, scheduling hypothetical calls or practicing mental run-throughs of potential deals. Yet now they were stuck with each other and a silent forest. The retreat would last one full week. Marcus unlocked the door and the two stepped inside. The late afternoon sunshine cast a checkered glow through the dusty windows, illuminating a small living room. Linda winced when she discovered a flimsy futon couch, barely sturdy enough for two. At first, both expressed relief to see two separate beds in the tiny bedroom, but that relief morphed into a mild sense of entrapment. They would be hearing every breath the other took once night fell. Determined not to let the environment get the better of her, Linda tried to keep a positive outlook. Her mother had grown up in a small town, after all, and Linda's early childhood included swinging on tire swings and chasing fireflies by the creek. Perhaps she could find joy in revisiting simpler times, if only she could block out the unrelenting itch to check her email. Marcus had little experience with the outdoors. He grew up in a bustling city, his earliest memories tinted by swirling lights and car horn. The closest he had come to a forest was a lightly wooded park near his high school, so the arrangement was decidedly outside his comfort zone. Nonetheless, he prided himself on adaptability. That skill had served him well in the corporate world, and he intended to tap into it here. Needing to establish some sort of order, they agreed to a division of chores. Linda would handle tidying the living spaces, occasionally supervising cooking. Marcus volunteered to chop wood for the fireplace and deal with any heavy lifting that might arise from foraging or dragging water buckets if needed. Their first collaborative effort was a quick trip to the lake to fetch water for cooking, as the cabin had running water only on a very limited supply, stored in a rusted metal tank near the kitchen. With two large plastic containers in hand, they strolled the winding path downhill to the shore. Along the way, Linda paused to inspect wildflowers, her eyes filling with a spark of curiosity she hadn't displayed in her corporate life for quite some time. Marcus, meanwhile, couldn't help noticing how the sunlight accented Linda's hair, how her shoulders relaxed when she breathed in the fresh air. The lake itself glimmered under the orange sun, its surface calm except for subtle ripples where fish occasionally surfaced. They filled the containers in companionable silence, discovering a small dock with old wooden planks. Linda dipped her toes in for a second, rolling up her pant legs, while Marcus, shaking his head lightly, teased that she might fall in. She gave a little shrug and a playful smile, surprising them both with her light-hearted response. In that moment, they both felt an unexpected wave of calm. Who would have thought that a day without emails might hold such tranquility? Back at the cabin, they began the process of making dinner. Linda rummaged through supplies in the pantry: rice, flour, dried beans, some canned vegetables, and rustled up a passable meal that she declared rustic. Marcus attempted to light the ancient propane stove, eventually succeeding on his third try. Their clumsy collaboration ended in a simple bean stew, a side of rice, and a salad thrown together from local greens they'd been told to look for in the small garden out back. It wasn't gourmet by any city standards, but after a day of hauling water and dealing with the unaccustomed heat, it tasted perfect. They ate by the soft glow of a single lantern, crossing glances occasionally as if noticing each other for the first time. With night drawing in, they took stock of their limited entertainment options. Battery lanterns illuminated the living area, but there was no television to flick on, no laptop to browse, no phones to scroll. Instead, they found a stack of battered board games and a well-worn deck of playing cards. They decided on a card game that Linda half remembered from her youth. As they shuffled the deck, conversation began to spark for real. Marcus asked Linda about her upbringing. He was genuinely curious how a city-savvy executive learned to cook a halfway decent stew from meager supplies. She told him about the weekends she had spent in her grandmother's country house, learning how to make do without a fully stocked supermarket. She admitted she missed simpler times sometimes, but the race to climb the corporate ladder canceled out nearly all such nostalgia. Marcus opened up more than Linda expected. He admitted he was not from the fancy background most people assumed. Much of his success stemmed from hours of overnight studying in a cramped apartment, sacrificing sleep to catch up on scholarships and complicated legal texts. He was used to doing things on his own, and ironically, he found it hard to slow down now that he'd finally earned a place in the upper echelons of his firm. Their conversation felt natural, in a way neither had experienced in a long time. There was no need to check the time or worry about the next meeting. They almost forgot they were still wearing their professional attire, though Linda had abandoned her heels. As dusk turned to full darkness, they decided to go outside and enjoy the stars. Living in the city meant they almost never saw the bare night sky. Here, the unpolluted heavens displayed an astonishing array of constellations. The two emerged onto the porch, stepping carefully on its rickety boards, and gazed upward. It was breathtaking. The swirling myriad of distant lights, stretching from horizon to horizon. Linda felt a sense of childlike wonder, as if each star connected her back to a memory of her mother's laughter. Marcus was equally moved, quietly taking Linda's hand as if by instinct, a small gesture that neither of them addressed, but both accepted. They remained that way for minutes, quiet and still, letting the forest cradle them. The next few days settled into a rhythm. Each morning, Linda would wake at sunrise, partly from her old habits of early meetings, and partly because the golden rays beaming through the thin curtains made it impossible to sleep in. She would brew coffee on the propane stove, the aroma drifting through the cabin and eventually rousing Marcus. Over cups of coffee, they would plan the day's chores, gathering firewood, washing clothes by hand, restocking water from the. Then, for a few hours each afternoon, they would give themselves a break from chores and explore the surrounding woods. They made a game of it, seeing who could identify the most wildlife or discover the tastiest wild berries. On the second day, they found a shaded clearing filled with tall ferns where they stopped for a rest. Linda took off her shoes and stretched her toes in the thick grass, while Marcus sprawled beside her. Both stared at the sunlight filtering through the pine canopy, comforted by the rustle of leaves. It wasn't all idyllic. They had their share of small conflicts. Linda complained that Marcus tracked too much dirt onto the porch. Marcus grumbled that Linda obsessed over cleanliness when they were basically in a wilderness environment anyway. One day, they disagreed over how many logs to chop. Linda insisted they needed more in case of a storm or a sudden cold front, while Marcus insisted that the forecast, as told by a local caretaker before they'd been fully cut off, was mild. Yet these arguments blew over quickly, replaced by playful banter. With no external pressures breathing down their necks, neither saw any point in harboring grudges. The deeper they ventured into the week, the more they found surprising enjoyment in the quiet tasks of daily existence. Linda discovered she relished kneading dough by hand to bake crusty bread in the old oven. She missed her fancy kitchen appliances in the slightest sense, but the tangible pleasure of shaping flour, water, and yeast into bread was oddly fulfilling. Marcus, for his part, took pride in making a perfect campfire, controlling the flame's size and heat as if he were orchestrating a symphony. In the evenings, they'd sit outside and watch the sun settle over the lake, each day a fresh masterpiece of orange and violet. Then, as night descended, they'd talk quietly in the living room or read from one of the tattered paperbacks that had been left behind on a makeshift bookshelf. By day 4, something more than companionship had taken root between them. There was a special warmth in the way Linda teased Marcus about the face he made when tasting her attempt at herbal tea, or in the way Marcus slyly offered to carry Linda's laundry to the clothesline without complaint. Their conversation flowed with remarkable ease. Linda found herself confiding in Marcus about the unrelenting stress of always being on call, how she worried she would miss her chance at a real family life if she never slowed down. Marcus, with quiet acknowledgement, told her how he was afraid to admit to his colleagues that he sometimes felt lonely in his high-rise apartment, cut off from genuine connections despite the constant swirl of networking events. The vulnerability was new to both of them. They had rarely let down their guard with anyone in the city. On the 5th day, they decided to row the small boat they'd found stored behind the cabin's shed. It was rickety like everything else on the property, but still serviceable enough to skim across the lake's glassy surface. Under a sky dappled by gentle clouds, Marcus rowed while Linda trailed her hand in the water. Eventually, they found themselves leaning back, letting the boat drift. Linda pointed out an eagle soaring overhead. Marcus turned, and for a moment they locked eyes. In those quiet seconds, the sounds of the forest seemed to vanish, leaving only the rhythmic lapping of water against the hull. Marcus leaned closer, nearly hesitating. Linda smiled softly, leaning in too, and their lips met in a slow, tender kiss that felt as natural as the warmth of the sun on the lake's surface. Back at the cabin that evening, the air felt charged with a new kind of energy. No one announced a change, but both sensed it, an unspoken recognition of the connection forged over their shared days. After dinner, they lingered by the fireplace, reliving small moments from their time here as though they were old memories. Marcus grilled Linda about her next big dream, and she admitted she'd always wanted to write a short novel, something personal and reflective, but never found the time. Marcus confided that he'd dreamed of saving enough money to open a nonprofit for underprivileged youth, offering free legal guidance. The vulnerability in his voice made her chest tighten. He was not just the brash lawyer she had imagined. There was a compassionate core he guarded as carefully as she guarded her own secrets. On the sixth day, the skies turned a brooding gray, and a wind whipped through the forest. Linda could sense a storm was brewing. Determined to prepare, they secured the shutters, moved the porch furniture inside, and collected extra buckets of water. Marcus prepped a stack of firewood by the door in case the power flickered out. Sure enough, just after dusk, thunder rumbled across the valley and the rain came down in relentless sheets. Huddled inside, they turned off the few lights to conserve battery, relying on the warm glow of the fireplace. It wasn't long before a stray gust rattled the cabin's roof, and the generator sputtered out. The darkness was impenetrable except for the dancing flames that flickered on the logs. Lightning illuminated the world beyond the small windows, revealing swaying trees and wind-driven torrents. Linda's heart pounded. Storms unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Marcus, perhaps sensing her unease, drew her closer. They lay on a thick blanket near the hearth, listening to the tempest rage outside. She was calm enough to breathe in his scent, wood smoke, and a subtle trace of aftershave that lingered from days before. His arm snaked around her waist gently, and she felt the tension slip away. In the middle of that raging storm, they found solace in each other, forging a moment that felt timeless, as if, no matter how wild the skies got, they were safe together. The morning arrived with a gentle drizzle, but the worst of the storm had passed. Sunbeams peeked through the thinning clouds, scattering golden patches on the soggy ground. Linda and Marcus emerged onto the porch, surveying fallen branches and puddles. The lake, though stirred, had already begun to settle. They shared a smile of relief. Standing there, faces toward the fresh morning air, neither could overlook how their perspective had shifted. They had come to this place resentful and resistant. Now, as the sun rose, they nearly dreaded leaving. They recognized how easy it was to reconnect with what truly mattered when all the noise of the outside world was stripped away. On their final full day, they decided to make the most of the sunshine that had returned. They prepared a picnic lunch, thick sandwiches, some leftover fruits, a jug of cold water, and hiked uphill to a clearing rumored to have a panoramic view of the valley. The trail was steep at points, with brambles snagging at their clothes, but they pushed onward, encouraging each other with playful banter. At last, they reached a wide plateau. The lake shimmered far below, framed by dark green forest and rolling hills. They spread out a blanket on a flat rock, marveling at the picture-perfect scene. After the meal, Marcus reached out and brushed a stray hair from Linda's forehead, then leaned in to kiss her. She kissed him back, both feeling that the moment was uniquely theirs. In that embrace, they realized how dangerous it was to hold on to illusions of independence. True strength, they learned, could lie in letting someone into your world and sharing the weight of uncertainty. That night, they cleaned up the cabin in preparation for leaving. Their ride back to civilization would come at sunrise. They washed dishes, tidied the shelves, even mended a broken screen in one of the windows with some spare mesh they discovered in the tool set. The space now felt intimately theirs, a sanctuary of sorts. They ate a modest dinner, hardly talking, each lost in thoughts of an approaching normalcy they feared they might no longer want. When every last chore was done, they stood on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, gazing at the lake under a nearly full moon. Time flowed differently in that hush, reminiscent of the first night they'd come out to see the stars. Linda tightened her grip around Marcus's waist, and he pressed a tender kiss to the top of her head. All too soon the morning came. They woke early, packing up the small amount of luggage they had brought. Linda double-checked the cupboards to make sure they hadn't left any food that would spoil, while Marcus stacked the last of the firewood neatly beside the door. When the caretaker's old pickup eventually appeared at the end of the dirt track, both Linda and Marcus felt an inexplicable pang in their chests, as though a chapter was ending. They clambered into the truck, exchanging final glances at the cabin's porch, where they had discovered in 7 quiet days not only the tranquility of an unplugged life, but a connection that might endure beyond the boundaries of dense boardrooms and corporate rivalries. The caretaker drove them down a winding highway until signs of civilization began to reappear: faded diner billboards, scattered farmhouses, a gas station. Linda's phone buzzed to life first, the bars on her screen jumping from 0 to 4 in an instant. Marcus's phone followed suit, dinging with messages he had missed. Both stared at their devices. For a second, neither touched them, as if reluctant to re-enter that old frenzy. But eventually, Linda flipped hers open, seeing an avalanche of notifications. She looked at Marcus with a wry, understanding smile. Perhaps the digital world was unstoppable, but they had learned it didn't have to define them. Back in the city, the pace of life waited. As relentless as ever, there were deadlines, emails, calls, deals waiting to be closed. The metal towers, the hustle of morning commutes, the flickering neon signs, they pressed in on Linda and Marcus the moment they arrived. And yet, they both carried a little piece of that remote cabin with them. They each approached their offices with a measured calm they hadn't possessed before. And from time to time, they would take a moment to close their eyes and recall the hush of the forest, the taste of that simple stew, or the comforting warmth of a crackling fireplace on a stormy night. Looking back, Linda realized that even though she had dreaded the forced retreat, it had served to realign her priorities. She now set boundaries in her schedule, carving out weekend afternoons to try new bread recipes or start outlining that short novel she'd always postponed. Marcus followed through on the idea of volunteering time to local charities, hoping eventually to build something larger. When negotiations or cases reached peak tension, he would occasionally step out for a short walk around the block, letting the city hum fade from his immediate awareness. He discovered that even a few moments of mindful solitude could be as revitalizing as hours spent in the cabin. It wasn't long after their return that Linda and Marcus found themselves gravitating toward each other after work. They would try small, cozy cafes for dinner rather than the usual hustle of upscale restaurants, where once they had each walked alone through the city, they now strolled together. Fingers entwined as they navigated the busy sidewalk, they discovered pockets of green in hidden city parks, indulging in the solace of found nature amid towering buildings. During these walks, they'd muse about the weathered porch, the star-filled sky, the clatter of rain on a tin roof. Inevitably, those memories led them to talk about next weekend, next month, or next year, and how they might recapture that sense of quiet communion they had stumbled upon in the woods. In time, they would plan a weekend getaway back to a place not so different from that original cabin. Although the demands of their careers were never fully silenced, they learned to carve out pockets of stillness just for themselves. They found solace in small rituals, watching the sunrise, cooking together from scratch, reading side by side on a couch with no electronic distractions. From high-flying business sharks perpetually tethered to their devices, they transformed into individuals capable of shutting down their electronics, letting the messages wait, and focusing fully on the moment at hand. Their retreat off the grid had reminded them of what it felt like to be simply human. Flawed, hopeful, brimming with raw possibility, and capable of deep, unfiltered connection. Change came in unspoken ways too. Linda stopped wearing suits every single day, opting sometimes for more relaxed attire that reminded her of carefree afternoons strolling through a forest clearing. Marcus grew less dependent on his carefully cultivated persona, occasionally letting his hair go unstyled or dropping the guarded small talk in favor of genuine conversations. Their colleagues noticed something different. Perhaps it was the way Linda and Marcus smiled more often in meetings, or the shared glances that prepared them to handle tense negotiations as a calm, unified front. Their synergy in the workplace improved drastically, leading them to an unanticipated streak of success, which both credited more to their emotional well being than any new marketing angle or legal strategy. In the end, it wasn't about renouncing the ambitions they held dear. Both Linda and Marcus still harbored big dreams for their careers. The difference was a renewed sense of balance. Time off gradually ceased being an afterthought, replaced instead by deliberate choices that preserved pockets of tranquility. Whenever life's noise threatened to overtake them, they remembered that cabin in the woods, the crisp water of the lake, and the golden sun filtering through the pines. Above all, they remembered discovering, in that place free of distractions, a love that felt both surprising and inevitable. They never forgot the moment they first saw the other standing on that dilapidated porch, each reeling from the sudden disconnection from the digital world. It was proof that sometimes to find what truly matters, you have to unplug everything else and simply be present. Whenever they retold the story to friends, selectively edited to omit certain private moments, of course they would laugh and recount the awkwardness of day one, the dull taste of bean stew, the squeaky floors, and the comically outdated decorations. But they also spoke of silvery stars, crackling fireplaces, whispered confessions in the dark, and the profound freedom of discovering that they could slow down without losing themselves. If anything, by stepping off the grid, they finally recognized the simple humanity that had been there all along, and in that recognition, they found each other.